expecting just to come out and just a sea of backs right at their
They're leaving, yeah.
They're leaving now.
Well, they're still there. We're very lucky to be blinded.
Stay.
So thanks, guys, for being with us. Hopefully the conference has been going quick. We only have about 20 minutes. This is going to be short, so we're going to try to make the best of it. We're talking about the first 100 days of the administration. Obviously, this is going to be one of those pat openers, but like obviously the first 100 days have been marked less by a big ideological change and more by unpredictability, right? Who should be paying the most attention right now to the changing legal space? Who do you think should be feeling most vulnerable and attentive? And do you think that the hype is obscuring sort of a lot of the...
Yeah, I mean, two things. One is everybody should, both because the unpredictability of what happens now could affect anybody at any time in any way. And two, everyone should, because if everyone did, we wouldn't be in this fucked up situation we're in right now in the first place. You know, in terms of the first 100 days, when you actually look at it, there's not really that much has happened, right? There was the attempted immigration, which in my view, fortunately, you know, a couple different judges stopped. There's been some executive orders, but they're not that meaningful in the big scheme of things, and no real legislation passing at all other than these failed attempts to repeal the ACA. And so a lot of it's hype, but still, the President of the United States has a lot of power, and I think anyone taking their eye off the ball is taking a lot of risk.
Look, I think uncertainty is generally scary, right? It's just not good for business or not good for most business. And I think as you look back in the first 100 days, that's the theme. You've just seen massive amounts of uncertainty, huge amounts of volatility, and that's just made it very hard for companies to figure out where to invest, what problems to go and solve, and how to navigate the environment.
So there's sort of like this sinister underbelly, though, to all of this disruption, the loss of jobs in the capital, so much going unfilled, so many programs stalling. Doesn't that create a vulnerability in government that we've seen so many startups take advantage of for so long, and now is reaching sort of a tectonic break?
It's funny, right? Because there's two ways to look at it. Way one would be the less government, the better. Right? Ronald Reagan had this famous line saying, the last thing you ever want to hear is, I'm here from the government, you know, and I'm here to help, right? So from a tech regulatory standpoint, on one hand, less activism is not necessarily such a bad thing. But on the other hand, A, you need the country to function, right? You're still relying on basic services and basic functions happening. And B, there are issues where you need legislative change. Oisin and I are working on an issue right now around worker classification where, you know, federal congressional action is really important to us. And so, you know, in this case, we want them to be proactive.
Yeah, I mean, at Handy, we've got thousands and thousands of professionals working on the platform, earning money, trying to figure out how to navigate this choice between 1099 and W-2 employees.
And you think both suck?
I mean, it's a false choice, right? You've got, go all the way back, right? So if you think about the last 10 years, we've basically built a version of the Jetsons. So we've built this push-button economy where people can press a button and have whatever they need delivered instantly. At the same time, you've got this motivation for work has changed. People are no longer just working for economics or for a wage. They're working for a reason, some higher thing that they want to accomplish, and they're valuing flexibility in a whole new way. At the same time of those two things, you've got us saddled with these labor laws from 1938. So you've got the FLSA, which was born in an era that just isn't relevant today. And we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we give people access to everything they need to be successful in this new era of work? And yet, we're saddled between this false choice of, we got to make people contractors, or they're going to be W-2 employees. And instead, we should figure out some middle ground or some gradient where we can say, all right, let's give people all the flexibility they need to be successful. Let's also figure out how to get people access to benefits, education, training, and all the things they're going to continue to need in the future.
So, but you know, one of the things is the Trump moment or whatever it is creating mobilization where there wasn't before. And one of the things that's happening is workers are speaking to each other and workers are organizing. I mean, isn't it funny that Uber went through years and years and years of trade press writing about how their workers are disenfranchised, and then we see Trump come in and now there's delete Uber, and there's solidarity with workers, and people are speaking to one another. Is that something that you guys feel in terms of worker, because that's old-fashioned, that is going back,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, but look, a few things. One is, I don't think this wave of activism just happened. I think for those of us, which includes me, who live in the Silicon Valley, Hollywood, Wall Street kind of media bubbles, it seems like it now, but the Tea Party's been doing this for 8 years really effectively, to the point where it helped elect Donald Trump himself. So I don't know that I accept the notion that people are finally getting active. And if you look at, for example, the attempts in Seattle to unionize Uber and Lyft drivers, you know, that long preceded Trump. So I don't know that the two are connected. I think what you have now is, you know, groups who were fairly satisfied the way things were going under Obama are now a lot more active and engaged. But there's a fundamental misconception. So there's a New York Times editorial a couple of weeks ago about the sharing economy, and their basic notion was, of course everyone wants to be a W-2 full-time employee. The people who aren't are just too stupid to realize that that's what they should want, but thank God we at the New York Times are so enlightened that we can write an editorial saying otherwise. And the fact and reality is you have so many people who are retirees or caregivers or students who are looking for ways, you know, most people, and Oisin can talk about Handy better than I can, on the Handy platform are only working 15 hours a week or so because that's the amount that they want to work. Handy could accommodate them 2, 3x that easily. And so the nature of work has changed, but I think most people kind of who are engaged in politics are so focused on how do I get ahead politically as opposed to how do I see how the world is evolving and make good policy around that, that you have this big cognitive dissonance right now.
I think when you put those things together, you're conflating things that aren't related. So I think you've got this movement that's happening right now, and you've got this sense of what's going on, and it's almost like we're living in the era of being outraged. It's like I feel like I should get a T-shirt that says "I'm outraged, you're not outraged." Like it's this thing where it's this palatable sense of like things are changing, and they're not changing fast enough, and we're not happy with how the change is happening. And if you go all the way down to the facts, yeah, folks on Handy are working 80% less than 20 hours a week, 50% less than 10 hours a week, average of about 13 hours a week, and they're doing this because it's incredibly flexible. They're not doing it for a full-time job. They're doing it because this is an opportunity for them to choose their own hours. It doesn't mean we shouldn't figure out a better solution for folks who are choosing their own hours to have access to benefits and healthcare, but it's not those things going together.
Gotcha. So let's talk about immigration and where that meets you guys. Because obviously, tell me a little bit about what you guys have been working on together.
So what we want to do is change the worker classification structure. So right now, you could either be an independent contractor, which means you have a lot of flexibility, but no access to benefits or any of the things that a normal employee gets, or you're a W-2 employee, which means it's your only full-time job, but there are things like health care or life insurance or workers' comp that come along with it. And our view is, given that there are now millions and millions of people who are on one platform or another choosing to work in the sharing economy, they want that flexibility of being an independent contractor. But keep in mind, unemployment's only like 3.7%, so it's not like there aren't full-time jobs out there these people could get. Instead, they're choosing to be independent contractors, but at the same time, why shouldn't they have access to benefits? So what Handy, and we're in a coalition that includes Instacart, TaskRabbit, Postmates, DoorDash, are all saying is create new laws that have a third category where we both can define exactly what an independent contractor is, and if we want to give people access to these benefits, we'll pay into these portable benefit pools, and all these companies have agreed to do that. But if we do that, we don't want your State Department of Labor turning around and saying, oh, you're a full-time employer, you have to change your entire business model. So we're writing legislation in New York, California, down in DC on the federal level, that would allow workers to finally have access to benefits, even if they're in the sharing economy.
Gotcha. So, and that's sort of an interesting idea that you're introducing here, which is that all of these problems we're seeing are characterized politically as being, are putting interests at war with one another, where the problem is that people are being forced into a false dichotomy of
Right.
being one or the other.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, then, is the issue then that it's not access to work, it's access to benefits, it's access to safety nets? Here's what I'd ask then. We've got a lot of people who are in the process of developing business in the audience. How do they cope in the meantime? should they be actively on the lookout for what's happening in the administration? And how can they meet you halfway between sort of the shitty duality of what we have now and what you've got going forward?
Look, I think if you go all the way back, this is not a pit labor against workers or labor against companies. This is just a big, complicated mess of a problem. And there's 27 million Americans that don't clip the 29-hour work week, who don't qualify for benefits and education and all that stuff. That don't qualify for benefits and healthcare, even though they're W-2 employees. So there's just a lot of very complicated vested interests, from very large companies to labor groups to old school contracting firms. And it's just a very, very complicated problem that involves lots and lots of people. I don't think there's any one company standing up saying, hey, this doesn't work in any format. It's just a process to go through, help people understand what the problems are, who the various parties are that are involved, and how we can get to a better solution for everyone. I think if you're starting businesses around this category, you're starting businesses that have this level of uncertainty, I think, yeah, it's going to be tough. There's just a lot of things that you're going to need to think about that you wouldn't need to think about if we had clarity. And I think the biggest is around litigation and around the fact that there's misaligned incentives between lawyers and people taking class actions, who are actually the folks making quite a lot of money from this whole problem, as opposed to the companies or the individuals involved.
Well, and it's also fundamentally un-American, right? So one of the things that really distinguishes our democracy and our society from a lot of others throughout history is the rule of law. We have rules, we know what they are, they're enforced by courts, we can fight about them. But even if you look at, when you mentioned immigration before, when you try to upend the rules in ways that aren't legal, there's a system, the checks and balances to shut it down. Here, I think anyone here who's trying to set up a company in the sharing economy would say, okay, what are the rules that I have to live by in employment to make sure that the people who are on my platform are clearly independent contractors and not full-time employees? And they don't exist. They're totally arbitrary. It's just at the discretion of a State Department of Labor to deem it however they want. And that is fundamentally, just the opposite of rule of law, where you know what the rules are and you live by them, and if you don't, you suffer consequences. And it's a vestige of the past that shouldn't exist at all. And I think the notion of people, whether it's different unions or old school businesses, saying, oh yeah, we don't think that new companies should have the right to know what the rules are because they don't make political contributions and we do, so therefore we have the ability to tell the politicians how to interpret something, it's just fundamentally corrupt.
I think we're too far along for that to be the case. So I think it's true, and I think when we started this, or when people started working on platforms or businesses or organizations around this part of the economy 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, that was okay. It was okay that we hadn't figured out the rules yet. We're now somewhere between 7 and 10 years into the idea that people can press a button, book a service, or people can press a button and get work. It's time we figure this out. There are real businesses out there that have figured out their unit economics, figured out how to make money, figured out how to serve millions of customers. It's time the government stepped up and figured out the solutions. So we're just at this point where it's no longer okay that it's this vague pile of like, okay, we're gonna figure it out in the future.
Well, that speaks to sort of like what the messaging has been for years, is this is happening whether you can keep up with it or not. And a lot of the battles we're seeing between labor and people in the tech community are all sort of just growing pains around the idea that we have not caught up yet. Regardless of, and in the first, speaking from a legislative standpoint, who then needs to be given the most voice and the most priority when it comes to shaping the legislation going forward?
I'll give you a tangible example. So yesterday, up in Albany, we had a bunch of handy professionals who were on the platform meeting with individual lawmakers, and it had an incredible impact, right? Because I think what they thought they would hear is, oh, I'm being exploited by the sharing economy company, in kind of the way that the New York Times of the world would tell you that. And instead it was, here's why I choose to do what I do. I'd also love to get health care. Can you please pass a law that allows them to do that? They're willing to pay for it. And so I think that when you give voice to the workers on the platform, of course, in any given platform, you're going to have complaints about something. But at the end of the day, there's so much mobility that, and so many choices, you can clearly work on another platform. I think about like some of the Uber campaigns that we've run, where we've put our drivers on the air in our commercials and say, I need the ability to make a living, so I support my family. And that's helped beat back bad regulations pushed by the taxi industry to try to limit competition. So I actually think our own professionals for Handy or drivers for Uber or whatever it is, are, in a lot of cases, the best people to make the case.
Yeah, I think when you look at the whole thing put together, it's not a let's just give one party a voice. We've got to figure out how to give voice to all of the relevant people. So of course our customers have a voice. We listen to them all day long. Of course they're going to vote with their dollars. Of course you've got Handy employees, Handy shareholders who have a voice, and yet we've got to figure out how to balance that with a worker voice. And whether that's an organized guild or whatever it may be, we've been actively talking to a number of parties in New York to help mobilize our workers, to help them explain what they like about the platform, what they don't like about the platform. This only works over the long term if you're delivering a platform, if you're delivering a service that works for all your stakeholders. Yeah, of course, we could make short-term wins if we favored one side over the other, but over the long term, this part of the economy is only going to work if we deliver a great experience for both sides.
How does this, and we only have a couple of minutes left, so I want to do one last thing, which is, we've been talking about how, basically just how like founders should be looking out and should be managing their companies, what's coming up for them. How does the first 100 days, or how does just the erratic behavior of this administration change the calculus in the investment community?
You know, there's the micro and the macro, right? So from a federal perspective, because keep in mind, most tech regulation happens at the state and local level, because when you're interacting with consumers, that's where the laws tend to come in much more on the federal level. But look, from a micro standpoint, fewer proactive federal agencies trying to cause issues is not a bad thing. If tax cuts happen, that could be good, it could spur investment potentially. If an intelligent infrastructure bill passed and we're not just throwing money building roads that we don't really need to take care of different politicians, that could be really good. If we're at war with North Korea, none of it really makes a difference, right? So, from a micro level, the first 100 days or the next 100 days may be okay, but from a macro level, we've all got to live in a society and live in general, and I think when everyone's living under a cloud of fear and uncertainty, that's bad for business, that's bad for humanity.
I think from the entrepreneur's perspective, it's the same three things. They're just more extreme. So it's when you've got an idea, it's find the one thing you believe to be true that the rest of the world hasn't yet figured out. It's that one nugget. And for us, it was that people were going to buy services online. And we dedicated a lot of time to proving that very early on. And today, 3 million plus times people have bought Handy services online. The second is don't fight big waves. So if there are waves of change happening, whether that's a move to mobile, whether it's a shift in terms of legislative environment, whatever that wave is, don't fight these enormous waves of change. And the third is if you're going to be successful here, if you're going to take what's normally a 10, 15, 20-year journey and condense it all the way down to 4 or 7 years of building a company, then all of the unexpected things that are going to happen over 20 years are going to happen over 4 to 7. And I think that point right now is more amplified because of uncertainty, and it's this idea that you just got to expect the unexpected.
And I guess the last thing would be is like, what are you hearing from workers really right now in terms of like that wave? Because do you consider that, by the way, to be a big wave of change is more and more working demands, organizing inside of Silicon Valley, of course, but like, I look at like a lot of the activism community broadly, and that does seem to be a major one of the unstoppable waves, if you believe that. So what are you hearing on the ground?
The waves of change that are coming through are people are not going to have companies set their part-time hours. They're going to demand flexibility. And whether we're at 3.7% unemployment today, that's going to clip down further, that power is going to go up, and people are going to demand more flexibility than ever before in the hours they're going to work. They're going to want to feel empowered to make real choices about their lives, and they're absolutely going to demand access to healthcare, benefits, and training.
Yeah, I mean, look, everyone here, we all want to have our cake and eat it too all day long. And for workers, it's pretty simple. They want all the flexibility of the sharing economy and of being an independent contractor. They want all the benefits of W-2 employment. And in this case, we agree, and we want to give it to them. And the idea that you can stuff the genie back in the bottle and return the world to the 1950s, whether you're Donald Trump and trying to do it around coal, or you're the New York Times, you're trying to do it around Handy and Uber, it's just not going to work.
Awesome. That's all of our time. Thank you guys so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Big round of applause, and thank you guys for sticking through us. Stay dry.